we don't like fakes. I have no time at all, and I speak for about 2 million gun owners in this state, who say, well, I support the Second Amendment, but. The word but is not in the Second Amendment. But there are going to be a couple of real tough issues that are going to become campaign issues next year, and firearms is one of them. Right now, the Second Amendment Foundation has, I think, 3 lawsuits going in the state of Washington. One of them is in Federal District Court in Tacoma, challenging Initiative 1639 on federal constitutional grounds. Some people think that's a weak lawsuit. I don't happen to agree with that. I think we might do pretty well with that lawsuit. At least it'll get the ball rolling, because whoever wins that, or actually whoever loses the lawsuit at trial in Tacoma, will appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And one thing that Donald Trump has done, which has been kind of clever, and he's done it kind of quietly, is he's been filling federal court vacancies with conservative judges. The state statute, what I'm about to show you, is a semi-automatic assault rifle. That's what a semi-automatic assault rifle is. But that is under Washington State statute, Initiative 1639, a semi-automatic assault rifle is just part of the plan by anti-gunners, and unfortunately most of them are Democrats, who they want to regulate firearms as a government privilege rather than a constitutionally delineated fundamental right. The way things have shaken out in Washington State since 2014, when the billionaire-backed Alliance for Gun Responsibility began buying elections and eroding our state constitution, the gun laws have gone downhill, and the number of homicides in Seattle have gone up. Seattle adopted a gun violence ammunition, firearms and ammunition tax in 2015. In 2016, when I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out how much money Seattle had actually realized from that tax, the city of Seattle refused to tell me. So I sued them, and I won. And I forced the city of Seattle to disclose the amount of money that they had collected. Just over $103,000. I bet you Kathy back there knows that. They had anticipated between $300,000 and $500,000 annually from this gun and ammunition tax. I don't try to lie to people, because it's easy to catch somebody in a lie about firearms. The gun control people make a habit of it. And you can tell the difference. In Olympia next year, we're going to get a slug of gun control bills written by people who don't know anything about firearms. I think the advantage that I have when I write about stuff, I use the FBI Uniform Crime Report faithfully, almost religiously, because they can call me a liar, but they're not going to say the FBI is lying to them. And the FBI Uniform Crime Report will tell you that year after year, far more people are stabbed fatally than are killed with rifles or shotguns in this country. Far more people are killed with bare hands and blunt instruments than with rifles of any kind or shotguns in this country. First and foremost, gun violence. There's no such thing as gun violence. That's a term that was cooked up by somebody in the media in cooperation with somebody at a gun control group. to demonize firearms. What do you call it when somebody stabs 9 people to death? The knife violence? No, they blame the bad guy for that one. Crowbar violence, when somebody beats his neighbor to a pulp with a crowbar and leaves him dead in the yard. Well, that's an act of homicide. No, that's crowbar violence. So just remember this, gun violence is a misnomer. It's an easy term, and we need to get away from using their terms. It's just violence. And when you hear a candidate say that, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from candidates over the next few months, jump right in their face over that one. Just challenge them, because that is a dead giveaway that they don't understand the issue. The issue isn't guns, the issue is violence. And the issue isn't guns, the issue is control. Because there is no such thing as a semi-automatic assault rifle.
Don't tread on us, we're not afraid. You work for us, we're not your slaves. Don't tread on us, you crossed the line. Soon you will pay for all your crimes. After a long train of abusive and dissipation, now we've lost our patience. Yeah, you're trying to kill our constitution, to kill our pride. Now the wood is dry. Yeah. Don't tread on us, we're not afraid.
Which is a good thing, because most gun law and most other kind of federal laws decided at the district or appeals court level in the federal court system. Very few cases actually get to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think now with a couple of really solid originalist conservative justices on the Supreme Court, that could change. The court has agreed to hear a challenge to a New York gun law that is so egregious that the state of New York actually changed the law in order to prevent the Supreme Court from actually hearing the case. Several days ago, the Supreme Court disappointed those people and said, yeah, we're going to have a hearing on that. I think it's coming up in December. That law is probably going to be struck down, even though it doesn't even exist anymore. The law in the city of New York prohibited licensed handgun owners from taking their licensed handguns outside of the city for any purpose. The only time they could travel with their licensed handguns, which they were licensed to keep in their homes, was if they went to a gun range, and there's 5 of those inside the city of New York. Most of the observers think that the reason they did it was simply to avoid the Supreme Court hearing, which I don't disagree with that. But I have another theory, and I believe it's pretty solid. I think that the government in the city of New York and in Albany, New York, the state legislature, realized that that law will not pass the constitutional smell test, and they knew it all along. And they scrambled to change the law to avoid being slapped down for it. Now, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, which is based in Seattle, would very much like to have Washington State adopt the same kind of laws that they have in New York and New Jersey, where they treat firearms ownership like a privilege. You can't let that happen. Washington State, when it adopted its state constitution and became a state on November 11th, 1889, adopted a constitution that contained Article 1, Section 24, which is our state right to bear arms provision. It's stronger than the Second Amendment. In fact, our state constitutional provision is so good that when Arizona became a state in 1912, they picked our language up word for word. Now, both Washington State and Arizona are open carry states. Arizona, a couple of years ago, passed what they call constitutional carry. Constitutional carry, in its simple explanation, you don't need a license to carry a firearm openly or concealed if you're carrying in a peaceable manner. I think that's a grand idea. I don't see a reason for me to be shelling out 25 or 50 bucks every 5 years just to exercise a right that is delineated in the Constitution. There's an interesting case that has nothing to do with the Second Amendment, but it State v. Murdoch, I think, from back in Pennsylvania. It's a First Amendment case. And the Supreme Court determined when they ruled on that case that you cannot charge a fee or a tax on somebody who's exercising a constitutional right. In Murdoch's case, he was a church, not really a pastor, but he was out representing the church, some church, whatever church he belonged to. And it might have been just a kind of weird denomination, but where's that ever happened before outside of California? The county where he was doing this religious work stopped him and tried to assess a fee, and he took him to court, and he won because the Constitution is made of rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of our federal Constitution, and a lot of people don't seem to understand the difference between a right and a government-regulated privilege. A lot of those people right now are serving in public office in Seattle, and they go to Olympia once a year, and I think some of you folks, or at least I hope all of you folks, would like to see some of those people gone. You know, we're not going to be able to get rid of all the anti-gunners, and you know, frankly, I don't have a problem with somebody who doesn't like firearms. We should forget that we have a philosophical problem. If you don't like a firearm, you don't need to have one. Just don't tell me I can't have one. And as far as assault rifles, I don't own one. I don't own an AR-15. I don't own an AK-47. My son does, and he spent 2 years actually building it. It was a project of his. And he would buy components at the Washington Arms Collectors. When he bought his lower, what they call the lower part of his receiver, he went through a NICS background check, because that's the part of the firearm that has the serial number on it. That is considered under federal law to be the firearm. It's got the firing mechanism in it. He did all that stuff. He did research. I was really proud of him. I did a story on that too. And I've shot a lot of AR-15s. Some of them are a lot of fun to shoot. Some of them are remarkably accurate. That's why people use them in competition to hunt varmints, coyotes. They use them for home and farm protection. Police officers have them. And if the police can have a firearm of that type, private citizens ought to be able to have one too. How many people in here own firearms? That was the wrong answer. None of my business if you own. But I wouldn't care if my neighborhood had a house full of AR-15s. As long as he's not doing anything to anybody with them, it's none of my business. I had a debate with a guy who said, it is my business. Well, why is that? Why is it any of your business what I happen to own? Well, It just is. Well, that's not a good answer, and that's a stupid answer. This next session of the legislature, I have a suspicion, and it's a pretty good one, I think, that they're going to go after two things. They're going to go after state preemption. They're going to go after concealed carry. 629,000 people in this state right now are licensed to carry concealed firearms. Outside of Utah, we are the highest number of concealed pistol licenses of any state in the West in relation to the population we have. We got about, what, 7 million people, 7.5 million people in the state? 1 in 10 adults is licensed to carry. That's a good thing. I don't have a problem with that at all. When you read stories about somebody getting shot in Seattle or somebody shooting up a neighborhood in Tacoma, none of those people has concealed carry license. In fact, most of those people have criminal backgrounds that wouldn't let them have a gun, but they still get the firearm. This is why Initiative 594 misled a lot of people, and it's certainly not doing what it was supposed to do. They pandered this thing to the public by saying that, gee, if we have universal background checks, we're going to prevent violent crime. That was in 2014. In 2016, we had the Mukilteo tragedy, and we had the Cascade Mall shooting up in Burlington. That's 2 years out from when that initiative passed. Didn't prevent those crimes. And as I mentioned earlier, in Seattle, the murders have gone up. Last year in Seattle, 31 people got killed. About half of them, I think, with firearms. The year before that, it was 22. The year before that, it was 16 or 18. Seattle is a remarkably safe city for a city of its size. Milwaukee has about the same population. They killed almost 100 people last year. Baltimore, Maryland, they're up in like 200 and 300. And we can even talk about Chicago if you want a real body count. Now, all those cities have fairly strict gun laws. And while I'm not going to claim that gun control directly contributes to the crime rate, there is a correlation when you disarm the law-abiding citizens, how the gangs move in, how the criminals get away with this stuff. It's something that is going to be political, and we need you folks to be on top of this, because you're going to be right in the thick of stuff here in just a few months. The election season is going to kick off. Things are said by people who don't know anything about firearms, and they're accepted by the Seattle Times and King and Cairo and Como, because those people don't know a lot about firearms either. I'm a reporter, and I know this because my phone rings occasionally. Somebody at one of the news agencies in Seattle, hey Dave, you know about this? You know about that? Can you tell me about this? Well, yeah, as a professional courtesy, I'm going to do that. I don't really care. I don't try to influence what they report. I just don't want them to look stupid. I will say this. As a firearms journalist, and I guess that's what people would call me, I don't try to lie to people, because it's easy to catch somebody in a lie about firearms. The gun control people make a habit of it. And you can tell the difference. In Olympia next year, we're going to get a slug of gun control bills written by people who don't know anything about firearms. All they know is that guns are scary, they're bad, We can't have them. We got to take them away from people. We got to regulate them. That's all they think about guns. Ask them. Yeah, well, I saw in Miami Vice where these guys have machine guns. Well, good. That's great Hollywood entertainment, but that's not really the way it works. Machine gun ownership in this country is legal, except in Washington State and a few other states. You can own machine guns in Oregon. I know some people who own machine guns. Knew a guy in Arizona that owned a lot of machine guns. I know an attorney down there, she owns a lot of machine guns. You pay a $200 tax fee. You go through an extensive background check. And you renew that fee, you have your stamp on the firearm, and you go through a background check every time you change one of these machine guns changes hands, as they occasionally do. Now, we don't build machine guns anymore for civilian consumption in the United States. That stopped back in 1985 or 86. But there are a lot of machine guns out there in private ownership, and the only times that I have ever heard of a crime being committed by somebody who lawfully owned a machine gun, both of them involved off-duty police officers committing felonies. One was in Ohio, and the other one, I believe, was in Louisiana. Now, in order to wrap this up, because I'm starting to sound like a professor, let's do some Q&A. Q&A is fun, and I promise not to get mad at anybody, not you. Go ahead.
You said that the gun enthusiasts would like to have some collaboration with those of us who would like to not see these laws become more restrictive. How can we do that? What are some ideas, some ways that that can be more effective?
I think work with people from the National Rifle Association, invite some of them up here, get some of the literature that the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms has. In fact, I've got a box here that I brought up, a little care package. Everybody can take a pamphlet or something out of there just to learn a little bit more about the Second Amendment Foundation and the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. Reach out to them because, frankly, we're going to need all the friends that we can get in 2020. And that's the ugly truth of living now in Washington State. I think one of your best strategies is to study up on the issue. Don't accept what I'm telling you. I've been known to make mistakes. I'm an old guy. But I don't deliberately lie to people. But check on something. Give me a call if you have a question, and I'll refer you to some place where you can verify whatever it is I'm telling you. I think the advantage that I have when I write about stuff, I use the FBI Uniform Crime Report faithfully, almost religiously, because they can call me a liar, but they're not going to say the FBI is lying to them. And the FBI Uniform Crime Report will tell you that year after year, far more people are stabbed fatally than are killed with rifles or shotguns in this country. Far more people are killed with bare hands and blunt instruments than with rifles of any kind or shotguns in this country. Most of the homicides in the United States are committed with handguns, and a lot of times those handguns are illegally owned and carried by the people who pull the trigger. Bad guys don't go through background checks. So universal background checks, I think, is almost a fraud. It's not going to prevent crime, and it's not going to keep guns out of the wrong hands. They're going to steal guns from police cars, as they do now. They'll drive a truck through the front end of a gun shop and steal all the guns that they can. That's how they get firearms. They don't go down to Joe's gun shop and buy guns and go through background checks because they couldn't pass a background check. These people, most of them, have criminal backgrounds that disqualify them from owning a firearm or ammunition or any kind of a weapon. But still they get those guns, and guess who gets penalized? Us people who legally own firearms. We're the ones who bear the brunt of that. So if you want to work with the firearms owners, gun owners would be delighted to work with you. They're begging for somebody to help them carry the weight. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not great with statistics, but I understand there are a large number of gun owners that are not registered to vote, and therefore they don't vote.
That's true. I think the biggest disappointment that I have and have had over the years, when I'm talking to people, for example, at the Washington Arms Collectors monthly gun shows down in Puyallup, guys will come up to me and say, I don't want my name on a list, so I don't vote. Well, I got a news flash for those guys. Their name is on a list. If they've got a concealed pistol license, their name's on a list. If they got a driver's license, their name's on a list. If they've got a social security number, their name is on a list. If they pay property taxes, their name's on another list. If they own a vehicle, their name's on a list. If they have a driver's license and a registration, their name's on another list. So they're just self-delusional. What they're really telling us is they're too lazy to vote. And voting in this state is so easy. You don't even have to get up out of your easy chair. Just fill out the stuff, put the stuff in an envelope, have your kid or your spouse put it in the post office or in your mailbox, and it goes away. We lost Initiative 1639 because too many gun owners and too many conservatives in this state didn't get off their apathy and vote. That's why we lost. If our gun owners had voted in mass, we could have beat that. In 1997, they ran Initiative 697, I think it was 676. At the beginning of that campaign, they were beating us 70 to 30%. On election night, we beat them bad, 70 to 30%, 70% plus. They couldn't even muster 30% of the vote. That was a gun registration and a handgun licensing bill. It was pandered as a gun safety measure. Whenever you hear somebody talking about gun safety, they're talking about gun control. There's only one gun safety organization in the United States. It's the NRA. And I know that because I'm one of several thousand volunteer firearms instructor. I've been certified to teach firearm safety for more than 30 years. I was one of the first certified self-defense firearms instructors, home firearms and personal protection firearms and courses offered by the NRA anywhere in the United States. That was back in 1980, whenever it was, mid-80s, when that program got started. I served on the NRA Board of Directors for 3 terms, 9 years. So I'm really one of those bad guys in the gun lobby. Yes, sir.
So, you listen to the candidates talk. What things do you hear that drive you up the wall?
How long do you have? When they talk about guns, first and foremost, gun violence. There's no such thing as gun violence. That's a term that was cooked up by somebody in the media in cooperation with somebody at a gun control group to demonize firearms. What do you call it when somebody stabs 9 people to death? The knife violence? No, they blame the bad guy for that one. Crowbar violence, when somebody beats his neighbor to a pulp with a crowbar and leaves him dead in the yard, well, that's an act of homicide. No, that's crowbar violence. So just remember this, gun violence is a misnomer. It's an easy term, and we need to get away from using their terms. It's just violence. And when you hear when you hear a candidate say that, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from candidates over the next few months, jump right in their face over that one. Just challenge them, because that is a dead giveaway that they don't understand the issue. The issue isn't guns, the issue is violence. And the issue isn't guns, the issue is control.
So when you talk about assault rifles, tell us what an assault rifle is, because it's from that term.
Well, a true assault rifle is a selective fire weapon. You can fire it semi-auto or full auto. You press the trigger and you blip off a whole magazine full of rounds, and that is a combat weapon. These weapons of war that they talk about, that Beto O'Rourke talks about, and Beto, he's one of my favorite guys right now. I'm actually hoping that he becomes the candidate for president. A true assault rifle is technically a machine gun or a submachine gun, because you can fire those full auto. What we have, the semi-automatic version, that's a modern sporting rifle. It just looks like it, and the reason it looks like it is because that's the kind of firearm that the last two generations of shooters in this country grew up with. Now, I grew up with lever-action rifles and bolt-action rifles, and in their day, those were the weapons of war. The bolt-action rifle saw a lot of action in World War I and in early World War II. In fact, most of the German army had bolt-action rifles. We had the M1 Garand, which General George Patton said was the finest battle implement that had ever been created. Good for George. He wore a couple of six guns, though. He had a Smith & Wesson on one side, and he had a Colt 45 on the other. He killed 3 guys with that Colt down in Mexico when he was down there with General Pershing. He had the notches cut in the grips. I've seen that, those notches in a photograph. Patton was an interesting guy. He didn't talk very much like George C. Scott, but he had a kind of a high voice. But that was the long answer to your question. What we are talking about and what they want to ban is not a weapon of war. In fact, the military wouldn't take an AR-15 onto the battlefield. But there are millions of them in circulation. At last estimate, I think there's between 15 and 18 million of those guns. Now the question is, how are they going to get them? Because we've already got them. If they think they're going to be able to confiscate them, well, their war on drugs hasn't worked out too well. They can't keep meth off the streets. How are they going to keep people from having an AR-15 that they legally bought, by the way? A lot of people are not going to turn those guns in. And there's going to be a big argument when they try to take them.
A big argument.
It's going to be noisy, too. A lot of courtroom stuff going on. Yes, ma'am.
So you said there are 2 issues for 2020. One was concealed carry.
Yeah.
What was the second one? Can you elaborate?
State preemption. Washington State was a pioneer back in 1983. The late Kent Pullen, who actually was a state senator at the time, and then went on to become a member of the King County Council, he fathered that bill. And the reason for it, state preemption, the statute is RCW 941290. What it does, and what it has always done, is provide for uniformity in our state gun laws from one border to the other. What's legal in Spokane is legal in Aberdeen, and what is illegal in Aberdeen is illegal in Spokane.
In Seattle.
Yeah, Seattle. Municipalities, prior to 1983, we had a patchwork quilt of gun laws. They were confusing and sometimes even contradictory. So Pullen got this bright idea, let's just make it the same from one end of the state to the other. And it was a grand idea. The state legislature acted very responsibly. They took the authority away from the cities to make their own gun laws. And they have zealously protected that for 35 years. Now there are people who go to the legislature in Olympia who thinks it's just a peachy idea to give up their authority as state lawmakers back to these cities. I think they're nuts, because all they're going to do is entrap people who are traveling from one end of the state to the other, from Vancouver to Blaine, from Grays Harbor to Spokane or the Tri-Cities or Pullman. You won't know when you cross that invisible line of a municipal or a county jurisdiction whether you're breaking the law or not. We can't have that. We can't do that sort of thing, and the only reason they want to do it, the anti-gunners, is to disqualify as many people as they possibly can from being able to exercise their rights under the state and federal constitution. That's why. If you can get convicted of a misdemeanor gun crime, they can yank your concealed pistol license, they can confiscate your gun, and they can make sure that you don't get a CPL again, or they make you wait for 5 years or whatever. That's what that's really all about. That's why state preemption must be protected at all costs. And that's why you don't negotiate with the other side over state preemption. When somebody walks up to you to negotiate, they want something from you and they don't want to give anything back. Now, I've been to the table with some of these guys. And they have said, well, you know, let's push safe storage. Can you dig safe storage? I said, well, I've got a gun safe in my house. I think that's great. In fact, I got 2 or 3 gun safes in my house. Well, how many guns do you own? Well, it's none of your business. But what do we get in return? If we go with safe storage, what do we get in return? And the answer? Well, you get peace of mind. And my answer to that? I got a gun. I already have peace of mind. That's the kind of deceptive negotiation that they talk about. When you negotiate, each side is supposed to sit down. There's going to be a little give and a little take. But the gun control crowd, all they want to do is take. They never bring anything to the table. And when they say they do, well, they're lying again. Alan Gottlieb honestly tried to have a meeting with Nick Hanauer, the guy who bankrolled 594. And Hanauer refused to meet with him. Now, why is it? Well, they dumped $10 million into a campaign that they said 90% of the voters in Washington state supported the idea of universal background checks. Now break out your pocket calculators, because we're going to do a little math. They spent $10 million plus on a campaign that they were sure to win, and they figured that they'd get 90% of the vote. On election night, they got just over 60% of the vote, and it cost them $10 million. And if we'd have had $10 million to spend, we'd have beat them cold. We didn't. We didn't have that kind of money to spend. And there's one reason I think that overrides all of them. Everybody thought we were going to lose. So they didn't want to invest a whole lot of money in that. Well, I'm not a firm believer in that kind of strategy. It didn't help us in World War II. Certainly didn't help us in World War I. We saved the world. We didn't have a lot of money when that war started. But what we had was initiative, and we had the idea that we got to win this war. Well, in 2020, we got to win this war. And I don't care if Republicans or Democrats protect the rights of gun owners. Their party doesn't matter to me. I just want them to hold to the Constitution. I know some pro-gun Democrats in the state legislature And I want them left alone because they bring a little sense to the caucus down there. But if we're gonna have a chance to stop these people, we gotta do two things. We gotta take back at least one house of the legislature in 2020. And it would be really nice if we could get a different governor from another party. And it would be extremely good to get a different attorney general.
Oh, boy.
Sir?
Where are Larry Springer and Roger Goodman on these issues?
I don't have a clue. They haven't talked to me.
Okay, and what do you see coming in terms of red flag laws?
Red flag laws are unconstitutional because they don't contain due process. Due process is mentioned in the Bill of Rights once, and in the 14th Amendment once. And the way they exercise due process now in some states, there's no due process at all. These red flag laws, the judge, what's his name, Napolitano, on Fox News. I suppose a few of you have seen and heard him. He's actually a pretty bright guy, and he did a piece back in, I think it was in June, that I read 2 or 3 times. And he explained why red flag laws are unconstitutional. Because they consider you guilty until you prove yourself innocent. They come and seize your property, and then you've got to appear in court at a hearing date they set to explain why you should get your property back. Red flag laws have already cost one man his life. A man in Anne Arundel, Maryland. The police decided to serve a warrant on this guy's house at 5:15 a.m. in the morning. Somebody came knocking on the door. If somebody knocks on my door at 5:15 in the morning, I'm going to have a pistol in my hand. That's exactly what this guy did. He opened the door, saw a couple of uniformed officers there. He laid his pistol down. They handed him this order. It was a red flag order. He looked at it, then he reached for the pistol. At that point, the male half of this 2-officer team grappled with him, and the female half shot him in his own front door. Now, as a reporter, I called back there to Anne Arundel County, and I got their PIO on the phone. And that was the first question I asked him. What are you doing serving a guy at 5:15 in the morning? What is this? Well, I don't know. He gave me some rambling excuse. And then he said, well, I'll find out and I'll call you back. I'm still waiting for that phone to ring. This guy is dead because his neighbor had some kind of a beef with him, or maybe it was his sister. Red flag laws, the way that they're set up right now, just about anybody can file for an order and have you subjected to one of these red flag laws. These de novo hearings, you don't have to be in court. In fact, you're typically not in court if somebody wants to hit you with a red flag. You find out about it when they come knocking on your door to get your guns. And that's not the way justice in the United States is supposed to work. You're presumed innocent until you're convicted in a court of law. Red flags, they turn that 180. You're presumed guilty until you prove yourself innocent. That's a no-no. Now, if they want to do these things, and they've been very careful in Washington State because they know we're watching, and the people I work for at the Second Amendment Foundation have a habit of suing and winning. Nobody wants to go through that. So what we do is we pay real close attention, and when somebody gets red flagged, and there have been, I don't know, several in Seattle, but they're very careful. And some of the people that they've disarmed in Seattle, trust me, these guys shouldn't have guns. They're nuts. And I don't have a problem with disarming some crazy person. Nobody wants to have a crazy person to have a gun. But in this country, when I grew up, you don't lock up people until they've committed a crime and you convict them in a court of law. And the way they're doing these things is a little weird too. They're just taking guns from people. They turn these guys loose. If these people are too dangerous to have a firearm, they're too dangerous to be on the street. But with these guys, it's the gun that seems to be at fault, not the crazy guy who could go out and rent a truck and run over a bunch of people like that loon back in New York 3 years ago who ran down and killed, I think, half a dozen people on a bike path with a truck that he rented in, I think, New Jersey. Or they can go down to the hardware store or the feed store and get themselves a bunch of fertilizer and coal oil and blow up a building. Believe me, you don't need a gun to create mayhem in this country. You just gotta be willing to do it and naturally pay the consequences. Next question. Yes, sir.
You talk about background checks.
What about them?
Well, my question is, hold on, Harris, he talks about we need more background checks. Don't we have background checks already?
We certainly do. In fact, Kamala is going to be here in Seattle tomorrow, coming to the Seattle ATM machine. And she's holding what has been advertised as a gun safety roundtable. Now, maybe I'm just a poor sport, but I wasn't invited to be part of that. And I don't think Alan Gottlieb got a phone call from her. And I'll bet you the National Rifle Association isn't going to be there either. So what kind of a round table we talking about? It's a gun control round table. Like I told you earlier, when these people talk about gun safety, they're talking about gun control. When they talk about gun responsibility, they're talking about gun control. Gun reform, I don't know what that is, but it's gun control.
But as far as background checks, I mean, don't we, doesn't
We have background checks.
So what are they missing?
Well,
We still have guns.
never underestimate the stupidity of the American listening public. When you tell them with the right language, use the right semantics, that we need common sense background checks, we've got common sense background checks. And we've had them for more than 25 years.
Why isn't some senator or some House member standing up and saying, excuse me?
They do, but the press never reports them because we know whose side the press in this country is on. And it's an embarrassment to me to tell people what I do for a living, because my colleagues out there, they think all of this stuff is just grand because they don't know about firearms, and firearms scare some of them. I got a standing offer to any reporter in Seattle who wants to go learn about guns, just join me at the range. I'll drop what I'm doing, we'll run out the range, blip off a couple of 100 rounds, and by the time we're done, they're gonna find out that firearms are fun, they can be used responsibly, and sometimes, gee whiz, I'm gonna go buy a gun of my own.
Well, as far as background checks, do we have universal background checks around the country now? Or
No, we don't,
or there's some,
and that's a good thing. Say my neighbor and I have known each other for 25 years, and he comes over and he says, hey, you know, Dave, geez, I'm a little worried about the crime in the neighborhood, yada, 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 and I noticed that you are out there reloading ammunition at late hours of the night. And I tell him that's only because the voices tell me to. But, if I want to sell him a firearm, I ought to be able to do that. But under our state law, I can't even loan him a gun without going through a background check, and that's going to cost me $50. And then it's going to cost him $50 to give me the gun back. I got to go through a background check to get my own firearm back. Now, how stupid is that? But they passed this law, and they passed it on the Seattle, Everett, Tacoma, Olympia vote. The I-5 corridor The rest of the state, if you get away from I-5, the rest of the state is purple, if not pretty red. But the I-5 corridor, they're a bunch of lemmings. They just, you know, they go along, and if somebody's got a D next to his name, including Ted Bundy, they're going to vote for him. Everybody know who Ted Bundy is? My sister graduated from high school with him back in 1965. No, they didn't date.
He killed the housemate of my cousin.
He was, huh?
He killed the housemate of
He
my
did?
cousin, yeah.
Who was that? Which one was it?
I don't know. It was a housemate. I don't know the name.
At the time, I was working as a stringer for the Associated Press when I was also the editor of the Snoqualmie Valley Record. Snoqualmie, if everybody knows, is out there on I-90. It's about 4 miles from Ted's dumping ground up on Taylor Mountain. So I was on that story. And you learn a lot about somebody when you track them.
Which Taylor Mountain?
Taylor Mountain, there's only one of them. It's over here in East King County,
I've been
just
up
east
there.
of, what's that?
I've been up there.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I didn't know that.
Well, now you do.
Are there any places in the United States that don't have background checks?
No. But there are some sane states that go along with the federal statutes. And the federal law allows private transfers between two individuals without a background check. That's what I talked about earlier about me selling you a gun or my neighbor a gun or loaning my neighbor a gun. And I would like that returned in Washington State. In fact, to tell you the honest truth, you know, and I've talked about this with Alan Gottlieb, I don't like background checks at all, because here again, you're trying to exercise a right, and you've got to prove to the government that you're not a criminal. Well, you know, it's not really the way it's supposed to work. If I commit a crime with that gun, yeah, throw me away. I mean, throw me completely away. Hide me in a prison or put me on an island someplace. But don't penalize every other American citizen for a crime I committed. That's not the way it's supposed to work either. And the other side will say, well, wait a minute, we license people to drive and we require them to have an insurance. And I said, well, okay, you show me where it says in the Bill of Rights that you have a right to drive. You don't. Driving in this country is a privilege. It's a privilege of using the highway system and the county road system and all those roads that we paid for. Owning a firearm is a constitutionally protected fundamental right, and we gotta treat it like a right. We gotta be zealous about that. And when somebody wants to start negotiating that right, what they're really doing is they want to erode that right. Rights are not supposed to be up to a popularity contest, which that's what a vote is. Next question. Get that camera out of my face. No question? Yeah, okay.
My concern is, they're talking about, like the AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
I hear some people, some friends of mine who are knowledgeable about guns, saying that if they do something along those lines with that type of gun, it's gonna scoop up one hell of a lot of guns in the United States that an average person would look at and they would say, they're saying there's gonna be some unintended consequences.
That's right. That firearm that I showed you earlier now is defined as a semi-automatic assault rifle. There's only one reason they stuck that language in 1639 last year. It was to create a definition of a rifle that they're going to turn around maybe next year or the year after, try to get it through the legislature, and when they don't, they're going to put it on an initiative to ban semi-automatic assault rifles. And guess what? They're not getting that one.
Now that gun there, so in other words, by being a semi-automatic assault rifle, if you shot that gun, how many times did you pull the trigger to shoot it? How does it work?
Well, a semi-automatic rifle or a semi-automatic pistol, you press the trigger, you get one shot. It's just like Grandpa's Browning A5 that he used to hunt geese with. Same mechanism, operates the same way. They are not, contrary to popular myth, easily convertible to full auto. Takes
Does
a,
that have a clip on it, or how many bullets are in it?
it holds 10 rounds in a little magazine like this. This is not a clip, it's a magazine. And I brought this along just to show you that the little tiny cartridge in there, they consider that to be the ammunition used in a semi-automatic assault rifle. Now I'm going to show you something. I brought along a couple other props. This is the cartridge that is typically used in an AR-15. It's a .223 caliber Remington or 5.56 millimeter NATO. The cartridges are a little bit different, but they're fundamentally the same cartridge. They say this is a high-powered assault rifle. You see that all the time, high-powered assault rifle. Remember that term. Now, this is the cartridge that I hunt with. It's a 30-06. It used to be the military cartridge in the M1 Garand. And just to provide see the difference? This is the powerful cartridge. This is the deer hunting cartridge. See the difference? The people who say that stuff and who use that rhetoric don't know anything about firearms. Remember that. People who write gun control laws don't know anything about firearms. And occasionally you'll run into somebody who says, well, I'm a gun owner and I support this. Well, how many guns do you own? Well, I own a gun. Well, do you hunt with it? Well, no, it was my dad's and I leave it in the corner in the closet and it's rusting and gathering dust. But I'm a gun owner and I support this. This is really what the gun owners, what the law-abiding gun owners, the rights activists are up against. People who really don't know what they're talking about.